mine, honestly, like pretty similar vibes, except I'm just going to be talking about like trauma specifically, and kind of the deep impact of trauma in childhood and how that manifests in adulthood. And then also like a little bit covering like next steps. So like something that really stood out for me in your section, Gabe, was the space around Nell. And I don't think I said the part that was probably the most important, because I took a training when I used to work in schools, and it was all about how one of my special interests, because of my personal experiences, is how trauma impacts the brain, and specifically like suicidal ideation and like all other things. So a big piece of what I learned in the trainings that I took around that is that the most important thing is that they want you to ask them if they've thought about it. And the next question is, do you have a plan of how you would do it? So that's like the big thing. So like they need to be like, hey, we see the bent neck lady. Do you think about it? Like, have you been seeing the bent neck lady?
Yeah.
Do you have a plan to talk to them? You know, there needs to be like because anyone can have thoughts about it, and then you need to ask. I didn't say that before, so I wanted to make sure I said it now. Is that like you need to ask, do you have a plan? Because that changes the conversation. You know, it's like if you're thinking about it, then it's just a venting space. They just want that feeling validated. They just want to know it's okay to have those thoughts. And then you ask the follow-ups, like, if there's a plan, then you know you need to call somebody.
Yeah, because that's like an action. Like you're acting on those thoughts instead of just having them. Exactly.
And there just needs to be like normalizing of that, because this world is horrifying. As you said at the very beginning, the quote intro, the book is what like reality is maddening. There's so much in the world. There are so many systems that act independent of people. Every action has so much impact that like to exist is like anytime CEO touched anyone. Yeah. You know, like it's so much to be here and alive. And especially if you fall under intersectional identities and have mental health issues. And additionally, like everyone, I'm going to talk about it a little bit, but like in terms of adverse childhood experiences on the website, I think it's the CDC's website, it says 62% of Americans have experienced. That's a lot. That's a lot of people. You know how many people are in this country? 62% of them have experienced one of the adverse childhood experiences that like is life altering enough to cause long-term health impacts, as well as mental health concerns, etc. And that like it's the majority of people at this point because of the systems of the world that we live in. So it's just like, this film does like a very beautiful, or not film, show, whatever, you know, media, this media does a really beautiful job showcasing the way that one, trauma is not a universal experience. That childhood trauma specifically impacts people in a very deep and concerning way. That the worst outcomes come from not addressing that trauma, talking about it, and having like stability at all. And that like, honestly, when you're dealing, like also like there's so many factors that go into how people are impacted the most by trauma. So I'm going to get into that. But there's something so beautiful and raw about this show. And it's so emotional. And like Gabe said, the ghosts like don't even like, they're cool. It's a fun backdrop. It's like a fun, spooky backdrop. It's good. It's fun. But it is like the least interesting part of the show. And that's what makes this show so interesting. And that you have characters that are so human. Like you said at the end there, Gabe, is like, they do not other these emotions. You know what I mean? Like they are human. No one is a villain. Anyone could relate to any one of these characters and their experiences. There's something for like, in terms of like the emotional trauma. There's trauma for everybody. There's a way you can process trauma for everybody. And that's what makes it really powerful, because like you see them as multi-dimensional people who have just experienced really hard things. So it's not so much like we saw with Infinity War, where it's like, I'm fine because I would never do that. It's like everyone is a human character who would maybe do a thing, and all their actions are super valid and like come from a place of hurt and not evil or like monstrousness. Like it's literally just pain. Everyone's in pain. So as Gabe got into about grief, I'm going to be talking about how like at the core, it's just about a traumatic event that's impacted this specific family. And I'm going to connect the adverse childhood experiences to that, and then like how their coping mechanisms developed as a result. And then also like kind of give some like next steps for you if you want to look into that. Not you, Gabe, but like the audience.
Yes.
So they're essentially drenched in the consequences of their mother's actions and the reality of what their mother was as who she was as a person, and then also like the impact of that big event that took place, as well as like every other domino that fell after that day. So essentially, according to the Recognizing and Treating Childhood Traumatic Stress, which is an article I found, it says there are 8 key traumatic events that can take place for a young person. I don't think this is the entire list that could exist, but it has some of the factors that I was looking for. So traumatic events may include neglect and psychological, physical, or sexual abuse, natural disasters, terrorism, and community school violence, witnessing or experiencing intimate partner violence, commercial sexual exploitation, serious accidents, life-threatening illness, or sudden or violent loss of a loved one, refugee and war experiences, and military family-related stressors such as parental deployment, loss, or injury. Additionally, the CDC website outlining adverse childhood experiences says that adverse childhood experiences are traumatic events that occur in childhood between 0 and 17 years old and include experiencing violence, abuse, or neglect, witnessing violence in a home or community, and having a family member attempt or die by suicide. So in unpacking these adverse childhood experiences with the Crane family that they're impacted by, the plot makes so much sense. The only thing missing for me was the way that trauma can manifest into physical illnesses. That's something that like they really talk about in the adverse childhood experience science, and how that like not healing from your trauma will manifest into physical harm to yourself, whether that's like, and I also recommend if you do look into this, do it when you're in a good headspace. You have to be, because if you don't, it's a bad time. We talk about this a lot in the Turning Red episode, and how this impact on the brain specifically extends past just mental illness, and extends past just mental harm. It can impact long-term health, increase our chances for physical illness, increase our chances for additional trauma brought on by this one event that stacks and transforms into additional challenges like the dominoes. For the family in the show, they experience multiple traumas. First, the mental health concerns surrounding their mother, then the sudden and violent loss of her. Additionally, they witnessed, for at least Steve, it seemed like his perception was that, or like the police's perception was enough to perceive that the father hurt the mother. So it could be the perceived witnessing of intimate partner violence, even though we know that that's like not exactly what took place. And that they additionally lost their father for a period of time as well when they were sent to live with their aunt. So essentially their entire stability of their childhood was destroyed in one day. There's also something to be said about Nell and Luke, and specifically how much they witnessed versus the other siblings, as well as their age. So age is a big factor of that, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But because of the events, it's reasonable to assume that many of them did not get the support they fully needed to understand what happened to them. As Gabe said, no one talked about it. They were not given the context. No one sat down and told them what happened. It was just like, we just got to keep going. You're going to figure it out, friend. And the problem with that is that trauma manifests so differently in every single kid. And that also like it dominoes in the fact that like you're going to struggle in school, you're going to have sleep problems, you're going to have like all these things stacked from this. And then if not addressing the root, you're putting band-aids on solution, like on the problem that will just get worse and worse as this child grows and gets older. So they were not given the context of this experience, and many of them refused to talk about it because of the way it made them feel, which is valid. The adults should have been doing that emotional labor for them, and they didn't. And that's the problem. And they also didn't have a consistent and stable adult, which in a lot of the science around that is that one of the key factors in someone being okay after a large traumatic event is having a person that is stable and there for them and like consistent in their stability and support that allows them to validate their feelings, helps them feel seen, and helps them like move through this event and have all the tools and context that they need to do so. That can be like the single most healing thing. That's why they say like counselors are really important. After school activities are really important. Having like adults, even if outside of the family, that can help the child through these events is so integral to like getting through it okay. And helps prevent a lot of the outcomes that we see, specifically with how Luke and Nell ended up. So
yeah, we talked about that also in Megan, that she did not have that. She had a very poor guardian to deal with her grief.
When you're not given like the words and the context and the helping coping skills, like that just stacks. Like it's just like all of your problems just get worse and worse and worse as you go because you don't have any of the tools to start unpacking that stuff. So a factor to consider is that ACEs impact on the growth in childhood and adulthood are especially complicated because one traumatic event generally facilitates additional ones. Losing a parent at a very young age, for example, generally forces children into situations that are additionally unsafe. So whether it's being pushed into the foster system, struggling in school, being more vulnerable to violence, being less likely to have your needs met developmentally, i.e. food insecurity, housing insecurity, medical and clothing insecurity, among other things. All these factors impact physical and emotional health, and the CDC lists the main problem associated with ACEs, especially when unhealed, saying that they can have lasting negative effects on health, well-being, and childhood and life opportunities such as education and job potential as well into adulthood are impacted by this. These experiences can increase the risks of injury, sexually transmitted infections, maternal and child health problems, involvement in sex trafficking, and a wide range of chronic diseases and leading causes of death such as cancer, diabetes, heart disease, and suicide. ACEs and associated social determinants of health, such as living in under-resourced or racially segregated neighborhoods, can cause toxic stress. And the impact of toxic stress can negatively affect brain development, immune system, stress response systems, etc. So these changes and these challenges can affect children's attention, decision-making, and learning. And children growing up in toxic stress may have difficulty forming healthy and stable relationships. They may be unstable at work with work histories as adults and struggle with finances, jobs, and depression throughout life. These effects can also be passed down to their own children, as some children may face further exposure to toxic stress from like the historical and ongoing traumas of a systemic thing, like systemic racism, or the impacts of poverty, resulting in limited educational and economic opportunities. So in another article titled How Childhood Trauma Affects Us as Adults, Healing the Heart from the Mental Health Center, they outline these factors influence a child's reaction to a trauma event. So like, how do children of different ages, different kinds of traumatic events, the severity and duration of the event react with that. So I think this is most seen in Nell and Luke. So a child's age at the time of a traumatic event can significantly influence their reaction. Younger children may not fully understand the event, which often leads to confusion and fear. On the other hand, older children might be more likely to experience feelings of guilt or responsibility. So
it's like Luke versus Stephen.
Yes. Or like Nell versus Shirley. Absolutely. Like it's very much like the older kids are parentified, told that their needs need to be minimized for the safety of the younger kids. And then the younger kids just don't understand and are not given the clues and the words to process that healthily. And it stacks. So the nature of a traumatic event also has an impact on the child's reaction, specifically certain types of trauma, especially those involving a personal violation or prolonged exposure, may lead to more severe or long-lasting effects. So essentially like a big event versus like you live in this always have different ways of impacting somebody. Severity and duration, the severity of a traumatic event and how long it lasts can influence a child's response. A single brief, as I said, brief, different than prolonged, because like your brain will start to heal when you are outside of that event. If it's brief, if you are continuously and it's recurring, your brain will not get to the point of healing from that event till you are outside of that unsafe environment. Proximity, this one also really, really, really has to do with Nell and Luke. So children who are directly experience or witness a traumatic event are more likely to have a more significant reaction than those who are removed from the event. So because Nell and Luke witnessed, one, a child death, two, the reality that their mom tried to poison them, three, were more closely linked to witnessing of the actual suicide. Like they had more context, but none of the brain capacity to process what they had actually witnessed. So they have all these older kids who were a little bit of a step back, like still impacted by, but did not see or know the true reality of what happened to them, who consistently, not like at fault for themselves, but like consistently invalidated and like denied their reality, which is like, does extreme detrimental harm to the brain, who doesn't know how to even process what they've been through. So they're like being told that like it didn't happen how they know it happened, and they don't even have the words to express what actually happened. Personality, just like adults, every child has a unique personality, which can impact how they respond. We see that in all the kids. They all have their own coping mechanisms and ways that they manifest isolation versus coldness versus overly being a caretaker versus logicking away their feelings, etc. And then they say support system specifically is the biggest thing. Is if you have a support system that is like a network, includes family, friends, community, it can significantly influence how a child copes with trauma.
It's a support system, right? It's not one person, it's a whole system.
Yeah. So you have people who are looking out for you and who are making sure you're okay. You have people who, like, even if it's not one person the whole time, you have a system, as you said, like that kind of holds you together, all the pieces of yourself. So previous trauma or stress, children who have previously experienced high levels of stress may be more vulnerable to the effects of a new traumatic event. So like reactivating triggers, specifically for Nell, the death of her husband. Was a very big reactivation of the trauma that she had already experienced that really caused her to spiral. And then coping skills, a child's ability to cope with stress and adversity plays a significant role in their reaction. There is a those with strong problem solving skills and adaptive coping strategies are generally better able to manage their responses to traumatic events. Essentially, like everyone's experiences aren't the same, you know, like you could have two kids witness something totally horrific and one of them's like, I don't know, I'm fine. And the other one is devastated, you know, like everyone kind of is impacted by events differently. And there's no wrong way to do it. Well, we see with like Shirley, as you say, like they're fiercely angry. Like they're like, everyone should be just as mad as me. You are all coping incorrectly. This is the way you need to cope. Why aren't you doing that? So it's like everyone does cope differently. And we all kind of just have to respect that there are going to be people who lose it. And there's going to be people who like have a stone face and then lose it in the closet by themselves later. You know, or don't for like weeks. And then like weeks from now we're losing it once everything's calmed down around them and they let everyone else feel their feelings. Now it's time for them. And if they never get that, you get Shirley. It's important to note that these are general factors, that every child's response to trauma is unique. And if a child is showing signs of trauma, professional help, such as a child psychologist or psychiatrist, should be sought after, but also like recognizing your own ability to help. And like the biggest thing that you can do is help that child feel seen, give context, be consistent, like recognize that no baby is going to like be throwing chairs because they're the worst thing that's ever, like it's pain. You know what I mean? Everyone just needs to recognize the why is not something evil or something crazy. Like it's pain. It's pain, and they just need someone to like look at the pain, say it's pain, and help them get through that pain. So I could write a novel. So to impact the family with this context is that we see the older siblings, they get parentified. We see the way their coping systems develop. Gabe really unpacked that already. But we see the damage that trauma can do most clearly with Luke and Nell. And it's kind of like, it goes back to just because you see someone dealing with someone in a different way. So we see like Shirley, who's like very well adjusted. It wasn't any less hard for her
Yeah.
She just handles it differently. Like, just because you do something well doesn't mean it wasn't hard for you. So it's like kind of also respecting everyone experienced this at varying levels, but also like everyone is valid in their experience. And they all just need so much like hugs.
They all need hugs. Yeah.
Therapy. And like caring people to really just take the time and look at what the pain is for what it is and help them get through that. But as I said, like the older kids get parentified, the middle sibling is like trying to get everyone to get along with each other. You have kind of like the minimizing of the older kids' family or feelings, and then you have the rationalizing that we see in Steve specifically. And I think a lot of Shirley's reasoning for being like the married with kids, having a stable marriage, like her marriage is such an important piece of her character, and like maintaining it. I think it's because she feels, and my theory is that she feels additional pressure to act as a stable family structure because they were robbed of that. They had their 2-family household. No one else in the family is having kids. No one else in the family is like having this kind of like stable family dynamic. So she feels extra pressure to preserve that within herself. And her cheating on her husband was like her brief moment of like, okay, I don't have to cling to that so hard.
Yeah, I don't have to be perfect.
Yes, I'm human.
I can have flaws. Yeah, because she doesn't allow herself to do that. She doesn't allow flaws to exist.
Yeah. Like she has to be as pretty as the bodies that she takes care of, you know, like she really has, but she can't feel anything. She has to be just
she has
like,
to be as dead as them as well.
Yeah. So see, it's so interesting. So fat humans, this media as a whole, so interesting. So Steve, although the oldest, tried really hard to rationalize and logically weigh his emotions, gave him practice a lot. And in doing so, he drove himself he closed himself off like emotionally to all of his siblings as well, leaving Shirley to have to carry all that emotional labor. So like both the dad and Steve were just like, feelings, I don't know what those are. We can't talk about it. Women, you know feelings. Go ahead. So they got parentified in that way, where Shirley really had to take that on. And then like Theo's like hyper empathetic self is like, dear God.
Yeah.
I just want everyone to
Everyone
be okay.
hurts, and so do I.
Yeah. So like she further gets isolated just because of her intersectionality and being queer. And then also the other stuff, like it's like so many factors for her that I found really interesting too. And also like why her career choice is like she wants to be what she needed. She wants to be the one person who notices the pain that people are experiencing, even when they're quiet and aren't telling people that. I relate to that. That's what I did for a bunch of years. And like, yeah, she has a unique role of seeing the pain in her clients that no one else did. Just like how she feels like no one sees her pain.
Yeah. And no one, like the fact that so many of them were surprised that she was a lesbian or queer. That she was bi, because they were like, why didn't they know? Yeah, because they weren't looking. No one pays attention to her. Middle sibling troubles.
Yeah, and also it's like she's so quiet about her pain too. You know, she's like, yeah, as you said, like she's kind of like she would like what's the word? She would like snap at people like a little bit, like in a like she was very like, don't get too close. I'm like a porcupine or like a chinchilla. What's the thing with the spikes?
The hedgehog.
Hedgehog.
She's about the hedgehog dilemma.
Yeah, she like desperately wants connection and closeness, but like not too close. Like it's too much to like have that threat of one, that being taken away, truly being seen and then rejected. There's like a lot of
like I will hurt you and you'll hurt me, and I can't allow either of us to do that. Yeah,
I got stones in my pockets. I'd rather have them in my pockets. You don't help me. I just drown by myself. No one else has to drown. I know what that is. I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
So yeah. It's a lot. And then also we see like Nell and their depression and PTSD like symptoms, because as I said, like when the loss of their husband, like they really spiral in a way that's just so the rest of the siblings like try to understand, but like they don't want to see it for what it is. And that like how reactivating that experience was, because Nell was so closely in witness to the big traumatic event, and the youngest, or not Luke was the youngest, but like younger.
No, she was the youngest.
She was the youngest? Okay, cool. Yeah, as the youngest, like the most vulnerable to that reality. And then also, as we see like Luke with his sensitivity and struggles in career stability, as well as his substance abuse, like he was the most tragic for me, even though he does live, like because of the fact that like I guess him and Nell both, like, as you said, like their reality was denied so heavily that it just makes so much sense of like why he would seek out doling that, because he just doesn't trust himself. It's just like really, like,
yeah,
it was rough. But if you are currently looking through your trauma stuff, I highly recommend the How Childhood Trauma Affects Us as Adults, Healing the Heart as an article. It was very interesting, and it provided a lot of like context for my section. So essentially, like, trauma and traumatic events can impact you in a variety of ways. But the biggest piece is they offer, like, in the article, there's like a next steps kind of thing of like what you can do with that information. Because while like the things that it tells you it can cause, like anxiety, depression, PTSD, difficulty forming relationships, substance abuse, dissociation, emotional regulation, there's so many things. So many things. Low self-esteem, sleep disorders, which is arguably what Nell has. Literally, she has sleep paralysis. And like all of this kind of trauma, once you start to heal from it, the brain is plastic. So that's the biggest thing that they kind of teach in all the trauma, like science stuff, is that like there is a way to come back. And that's, I think, at the end, like Gabe, you were saying, like with the really hopefulness of the show, whereas like you really do get to a point where you're like, yeah, all of these things happen. We're finally looking at them for what it is. And we've paid such a heavy cost already, but there is somewhere to go from here, and that they finally are looking at it. They're not allowing these wounds to be unseen anymore. They're really unpacking their guilt and shame and all the like really negative things that went into these emotions. And essentially there are ways to like heal from it. So therapy techniques, I'm going to just give a little overview of things that you could seek out if you were looking for ways to heal from these things. There's a bunch of different kinds of therapies that exist that they outline in the article, specifically cognitive behavioral therapy, eye movement, desensitization and reprocessing. So EMDR, it's a kind of psychotherapy that helps people heal from the symptoms of emotional distress, involving recalling the experiences while receiving bilateral sensory input, such as side-to-side eye movements.
That happens, I think it's in What My Bones Know, the book, the memoir that I read about PTSD and some of those things. She does that.
Yeah. Is it because like it like sends those memories like more to like a dream space? Or is like, I don't know. I
think it like disarms you, so you're able to navigate them differently. Like I think we get caught up in a specific way that we're supposed to remember or experience or think of things. And so when you are forced to think of them in a different way, it makes you more susceptible to being open to them. It's just kind of like, it's like tricking your brain into doing the work because it put up all those walls. So it wouldn't have to.
Yeah. So that is one. Semantic experiencing, which is this approach that follows the body's responses to trauma. It releases the physical tension that remains in the aftermath of a traumatic event. There's a few different versions of cognitive behavioral therapy. There's narrative therapy, a therapeutic technique that encourages individuals to rely on their skills to minimize problems that exist in their daily lives. Through narrative therapy, individuals can examine their life stories and rewrite or reframe aspects of them that have been influenced by the childhood trauma. So honestly, that's kind of like what Steve does. A little bit. Educating yourself on how trauma impacts the brain and like ways to heal and reduce the like isolation and pain of those experiences through like validating them and finding like community and stuff like that. Mindfulness and relaxation techniques, which sounds silly like in the context of all of that, but I think it does, like, it connects you to your body in a way that you kind of get attached to dissociating as a coping mechanism, especially when you've experienced a lot of trauma in adulthood. So any activity that kind of like places you in your body can be really helpful in healing and like being more grounded in yourself. And that like all these things kind of work differently for everybody. I also list in our show notes the helplines that exist. I'm going to see if I can find some more resources around like mental health supports and stuff like that, just because this is such a heavily trauma motivated episode, that you do need like next steps on how to deal with it. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I'd say like the first step is, doing what it took so long for the Cranes to do, and that's like accepting it, like understanding it, acknowledging it, like understanding that it does have an impact on you. And I think that's the first step, is just like, hey, this happened, and now what? Like, what has happened? Like, I think there are often times where I do things or I react in certain ways, and I'm like, oh, like all of a sudden, like there'll be this light bulb of like, oh, that's probably because X, Y, and Z, which is in no way like an excuse for behavior. Like when there are things that, I've done and I regret, it's not like, oh, trauma did that to me. It's like, okay, trauma did that to me. So how can I avoid it next time?
Yeah.
Like I'll take responsibility for that, because like it just informs my decisions and reactions. It doesn't excuse them, right? It's just like, okay, I did this because of that. Now let's not do that because that was bad or that was harmful, or, so like kind of taking responsibility, which is just something they were not doing because they weren't taught to do that. Like even like, because it wasn't like Olivia was just sick one day. She had a history of this. She had, it was a genealogical thing too. Like she references things like there's clearly a history. She's had these storms. She has her colorful like moments. She has, like even in her talking to Theo, right, and giving her those gloves, it was like other women in this family have encountered similar things. Yeah. So like, I understand that. And it was them always just being like, oh, like, I think for them is they thought they figured it out.
Yeah.
When you have, when she has these things, she does this. When she does this, she does that. And they just never thought about like, instead of being reactionary or like ignoring it or thinking we fixed it, it's understanding that it's a lifelong thing that we're going to have to continually adapt to and work with and acknowledge, in order to, avoid some of those experiences or results of 100%. Some of that harm.
I'm so glad you said that, because I was thinking about that honestly recently, where I was like, similarly, I was just like, I always think I'm over a thing, and then like I really go back, it'll come up later, and I'll just be like, dang, I guess I wasn't over that as much as I thought. I really need to unpack that more, huh? And like we're like, just because you've done growth doesn't mean you're done growing, like it's really it's such a process, and it's lifelong, as you said. Like you really can't ever just stop doing it. You're never fixed. You're a person. You're a person who exists, and as long as you exist, you're going to be doing stuff. So you're going to need to be unpacking this stuff like all the time, and that's a lot of work and super overwhelming, especially under the hellscape of oppressive capitalism, and all the other things that be. So like it's a lot. It's a lot.
Which is why you need that system, right? You need support. You need love and care and understanding for yourself and for other people, and understand we're all experiencing a lot. We all come from our own lives and like, our own dominoes to get here. And I think really the biggest thing is like understanding that that's, like you said, you never stop growing. Even though you're this person now, you were made to this person, you can be a different person, or not different. You could just keep adding to this person. You're like, you could become new things. You could add new things and, replace broken things so that your ship works better. I don't know.
And not looking at it doesn't make it go away. It just makes it stay longer, just to manifest in different ways. The last little thing I want to say about this show that I forgot to say in my section, and this is real quick, is that like the show does a really great job of giving you all the information in like an inconsistent way, very much similar to how trauma like is activated by sensory stuff. It's activated by events. It's activated by seeing people. It's not something you experience in like order. Like our remembering of traumatic events is generally like Nell says at the very end, confetti. Like it's sprinkled throughout. There's no timeline. And the show does a really beautiful way of delivering that to you, very similarly to how the brain would process trauma, where it's always very like you see this character or this event happens or like this takes place and that's activated all those feelings and those memories for you to like put this context together. So that's something also very beautiful about the show. So kudos. Flanagan. I don't know what he experienced in his life, but it taught him something. So it was cool. He did a cool thing with this. Yeah.
I think, that nonlinear reaction. And also like the fact that everyone experienced the same event differently. Yeah. They all had different parts of the information. And that's also just like how life is. We do not get the full picture. We do not often get all of the points of views.
Silly networks.
So we have to confide in each other. We have to share that information. So then we can be more educated in our responses, in our actions and answers to what's happening. Community. So I'm gonna say we'll see when we get to the Fall of House of Usher. I do really love it. And I told my good friend Jeff that I was like, oh man, that's the best work Flanagan's ever done. I'm going to come back, and I think, honestly, The Haunting of Hill House is. We'll see. We're going to explore 3 more of his shows. So we'll see how I feel, and if when we get to the end, we get to Usher, if I feel as strongly about it. But I'm like, I don't know. This one was kind of a masterpiece, and I'm sorry that you started with this because you kind of set yourself up. Strong, but I think he sustained himself pretty well. I think a lot of the stuff he does is pretty great. So stay tuned. Let us know what your favorite Flanagan thing is, whether it's a TV show or film, or I don't know if he's helped other people on things, whatever. Tell us about it. Tell us how you feel about The Haunting of Hill House, any of the media that was influenced by the book. And don't get married.
Let your kids. Or your kids will be sad because you traumatize them.
Well, you probably will. Okay, let's get that out. You're gonna traumatize your kids. So what do you do about it?
Minimize that as much as possible. You gotta react to it as it happens.
Yeah, they're gonna get scuffed up, right? It's just like, unfortunately, what Dory says: if you never let anything happen to them, then nothing will ever happen to them.
Yep.
And then they won't be able to react when they're adults. So,
yeah. Okay. Well said. Bye.
Thanks, Dory.